Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Finally, we have a chance to review and tear down the Glorious Panda switches that I just got in the mail on launch day, which was September 4th, 2020. And it's been a few days since I actually put them in a board and tried them out myself. So I think I'm ready to do this review and tear down on them. Let's jump into it. Alright, so first I would like to say that I'm a person who really enjoys heavy tactile and heavy linear switches. So when Glorious reached out to me to ask if I would like to review and tear down their switches, I was like, heck yeah, of course. Obviously, I'm probably going to like these switches. I'm not a switch connoisseur by any means. I haven't tried all the fancy switches out there. Onto the review. So what do you get in the box? The packaging obviously says Glorious Holy Panda switches, but they changed their name to Glorious Pandas, and I'm sure by now you've read up on all of it because everyone's been talking about it. But if you haven't, I'll just link down below as to why they changed their name from Glorious Holy Pandas to Glorious Panda switches. So in the box, you get a Glorious Panda sticker, and it's really quite cool. I would rep it. It's like an angry panda. It looks like this. It's in black and white, very cool looking. You also get a little brochure thing that explains all about Glorious PC Gaming Race, as well as what other products they offer and where you can check them out on their website and on social. And of course, you get the Glorious Panda switches themselves. They're all in a Ziploc bag. Honestly, they're delivered like they're packs of bullets. You know, when you go to the store and you buy these boxes of ammo, that's sort of what they remind me of. And before you think anything weird, I don't go and buy ammo often at all, but I have been to the range, so that's just what they remind me of. All right, and these are $25 or $24.99 for 36 switches. That comes out to about 70 cents per switch. So not exactly on the budget affordable side, but really not on the really high-end over $1 switch side either. Not only this, but Glorious also says that they'll be in stock indefinitely, which means you won't have to enter a group buy, you won't have to enter any drops, wait a few months until you get them, and you also have access to them rather than waiting for a launch and then having them sell out in about 3 to 5 minutes, and well, that's it. Gotta wait for round 2, right? So these will be affordable. They'll be in stock all the time after this pre-order. Hopefully, we'll see. That's what Glorious is saying, but honestly, a lot of companies have been saying, you know, it's gonna be in stock. It's gonna be in stock. But that's not really the case. So we'll see in the future how this all goes down, and I mean, I really hope they'll be in stock. That would be super cool. They'll be one of the better tactile switches that'll be on the market that you can just buy whenever you want. All right, so on to the build quality of these switches. At first glance, you can see that they have a very opaque housing on the top and the bottom, but they do offer a hole where that your LEDs can shine through, if that's what you're into. And that's because the light really doesn't shine through or diffuse all that well, because lighting doesn't really get through the switch housings. I believe the top is polycarbonate, the bottom is nylon, and then the stem is palm. I mean, I'm by no means someone who's knowledgeable about all these different plastics. They're great materials. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. As far as quality goes, each switch is pretty much all the same. I've had no quality control issues at all. The housings are quite tight, tighter than most other switches that I've used. They snap onto your plate really well, and to get them off, you will have to use a switch puller. Unlike some other switches where I can just pull off the keycap and the switch comes out with it, which is not the best thing, by the way. These switches stick to your board. And I mean that in a really good way. There's very little wobble between the switch and the plate itself, so there's not really extra sounds there. As far as the stem wobble goes, there is a little bit of play there, but it's really not a concern of mine. The bottom and the top housing fit together quite nicely. There is some wiggle room though, so these can benefit from really thin films if you're into that. I mean, if you're already lubing them, you might as well add films, right? Personally, I don't see the need to add films, but if you're going to solder these in a board and keep them pretty much there permanently, I don't see why not. Films are pretty cheap. Why not film your switches, right? They're tight, but they're not too tight. There is some room to wiggle. And then as far as the switch goes, these are plate mounted switches. This means it has 3 pins on the back, the middle pin, and then 2 metal pins to actually attach to your board. What this means is that you won't be able to use these switches on any PCB mounted keyboards. What this means is if there's no plate, then you can't use them because it's not going to be stable at all. There's going to be some wobble even if you're going to solder them to your board. But it's great for hot swap builds because there's always a plate and you're going to be able to fit them in even in those 3-pin sockets. And then the switch style is an MX style. So if you have different switch openers, an MX style and a KL style, these are going to be the MX ones. And if you don't have a switch opener, these will be a lot easier to take apart than the other style because all you need is a flathead screwdriver, pry each of the legs open, and then that's how you open your switches to lube them that way. So you don't necessarily need to buy a dedicated switch opener, but it will save you time. So I highly recommend if you're going to open your switches, you should get a switch opener. All right, so let's go to the way that they feel. So, and I'll be comparing stock versus lubed. I did lube them with Tribosys 3203. The reason I chose 3203 was so that I could keep all the tactility that I could. Although personally, I think I prefer a more soft and a more rounded tactile bump, but I'm sure other people really like the sharpness and the snappy ones. So that's why I chose this one. If it were up to me, I would have gone with 205G0, lubed the legs, lubed all of it, and that would have been my play, but I think that goes against why people would buy a Glorious Panda in the first place. You want the most tactile, you don't want something round or soft, then you get something else, right? So the stock feel was pretty smooth, I would say. There wasn't really much any sandy feeling or any scratchy feeling. It was more the sounds that threw me off a little bit. So there is a little bit of pre-travel before you hit that bump. But when you do, you definitely feel it. It's pretty short, I would say. It's not rounded at all. It's more like you press it, you feel it, and you're like, okay, I'm done. And because of the spring weight, even with how heavy I type, I don't tend to bottom out with these switches at all. I pretty much let go right after I feel the bump, and I think this is great for people who do a lot of typing. For people who do a lot of gaming, it might be a distraction of sorts for your fingers to feel a bump and to let go, but I think some gamers are hovering more towards the tactile side than the linear side, but it really depends. It's all preference. After the lubing, it felt just as tactile, but the smoothness definitely improved for sure. I think the lubing really affects the sound a lot more than the feel for these switches. They weren't bad to start with at all. As for the sound, I really did not like the way that they sounded while they were stock at all. When you press it, when you get to that bump, there's this kind of like crunch sound where the spring sort of, something happens there, and there's a little crunch, and then there's that bottom out, and then when you let go, there's a sort of a high-pitched clack when the stem hits the top housing again, and I think that really bothers me. There's that crunch, there's a spring ping, and then there's a high-pitched clack when it hits the top. So after lubing, the crunch is still there, although it's more minimal. There's no spring ping, and when you let go of the key press for it to snap back up, there's a lower pitch sound, which sounds much more pleasant to the ears. It's unfortunate that it still has the crunch sound. I would have really liked this to disappear, but maybe because of how snappy it is and how quick it is, that's just what you get. On the other lube switches that I use, my Halo Clears and my T1s, there's really no crunch, but I did lube the legs and I used 205G0, so there's not really an apples to apples comparison in the first place. But I'm just saying, there is an unpleasant noise after lubing still. But maybe if you use another lube and more lube, things could be different. All right, so price, these are a much better price and have more accessibility and availability than the drop Holy Pandas, which I did order, and hopefully they'll come the end of the month, but it has been delayed a little bit, so we'll see how that goes. The Glorious Pandas will be about 70 cents per switch compared to the $1.20 per switch of the drop Holy Pandas, and you can lower it a little bit depending on how many you get. But that's quite a lot for a single switch and quite a lot to be waiting a little bit of time before you actually get them. Maybe it's part of the excitement, maybe it's part of the exclusivity, I suppose. But, you know, once again, I'm not super experienced with switches, and this is probably my first ever switch review and probably the only. So should you lube these switches? Absolutely yes, you should absolutely lube them. If you're buying them and you're not gonna lube them, why are you even buying them? I mean, right? They come non-soldered to a PCB. They're really easy to open up. Glorious is even selling their own lube now called G-Lube. They don't really tell you what's in it or what it is or what the viscosity is like, but I'm going to assume it's something like 205G0 that's meant to be used on their switches. As far as lubing goes, I recommend Tribosys 3203 if you're more focused on keeping that tactility, and then Krytox 205G0 if you're in it more for the round. Still pretty bumpy. It's still a really tactile bump, but it's a little softer and there's a more buttery feel. So, I mean, should you get them? They're a really good price. Honestly, even if Glorious did not send these to me, like, I would have went out and bought them. But in the end, it is up to you. It is all preference. My husband does not like them. Initially, he thought they sounded really great, but he's just not really into the heavy switches. He's more of a light fingered. And of course, you can spring swap them, but then you need to buy those separately, open them up, and then replace the springs. It's really up to you. It's preference. I'm pretty sure that's a cop-out, but everyone says it's preference, and it really is. I might like something that you really hate, and you might like something that I'm just like, whatever. I'm copping out. I just am. That's the answer. Anyways, I'm gonna do a full sound test. I know I did one previously, but everyone was like, oh, that keyboard's so hollow, and those keycaps are so bad, and those stabilizers are not even modded, so here we go. These are lubed and clipped stabilizers, and they sound much better. And I replaced the keycaps with EnjoyPBT ABS keycaps. They're cherry profile, they're Dolce colorway, they look good. And of course the keyboard is still the same. It is a Kemove Shadow. It's not the fanciest, but we don't really have any fancy hot swaps right now. Hopefully we'll get one. All right, that was the sound test. If you're interested in the stock sound versus the lube sound with the previous setup, go ahead and click this video right here. And then I'm going to include a typing test sound of the T1s as well. They're lubed with Krytox 205G0. They are on another board, but it's a very similar board. It's not fancy either. It's a budget hot swap. So that's the Duroc T1s lubed with Krytox 205G0 on a Keychron K6 right now. All right, so those are the two sound tests. As you can probably hear, there is some additional noise in the Glorious Pandas, but they are also much more snappy and much more responsive when it comes to that tactile bump. The T1s with the lubing that I did is much softer. It still has a pretty good bump, but those switches require a little bit more effort since they absolutely need to be filmed to sound good, or else they sound like trash and then they suck.